Well, isn't it interesting when someone who has disrespected you is suddenly nice to you, just when you happen to have something that they want? Let's talk about it on Azimuth Podcast. I'm Kimberly McNabb, and with me is Barrett McNabb.
Yeah, so we have this clip to show you discussing the flip-flopping of Senator Schumer. So let's take a look at this real quick.
Senate leaders from both parties think they have the path to the majority in November. Republicans have focused on knocking out Democrats in red states like Tim Sheehy defeating Jon Tester in Montana and Bernie Moreno defeating Sherrod Brown in Ohio. Democrats are making their first multi-million-dollar ad buys in Texas to support Colin Allred against Ted Cruz, and in Florida to help Debbie Mucarsel-Powell against Senator Rick Scott. This comes as Vice President Harris and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer are saying they want to eliminate the filibuster for reproductive rights. We're back with our panel, Dan Henninger, Kyle Peterson, and Kim Strassel. So, Kyle, what do you make of Harris coming out here and saying, yeah, let's get rid of the Senate filibuster rule, that 60-vote rule to pass something, so you only have to do it with 51. She didn't have to say that.
No, but I think it's a mistake on the merits for a couple of reasons. One is it
political mistake?
Yeah, I think it raises the stakes for many of these voters who might like Jon Tester personally, but then they start thinking about what one party in the Senate could do with 50 votes. And by the way, a Senate without a filibuster that lets Democrats do anything they want with 50 votes is also a Senate that lets Republicans do whatever they want with 50 votes. And so that's, I think, the deeper mistake that she's making. She's imagining Democrats are going to come in and codify Roe v. Wade and so forth. But then Republicans, as soon as they take majority control of the Senate, it's national right to work and national abortion restrictions.
Kim, it's not just Kamala Harris. Chuck Schumer said he wants to break the filibuster not just for abortion, but for voting rights, impose a national voting law on all 50 states. Sheldon Whitehouse, the senator, wants to do it for the Supreme Court. Ron Wyden came out this week and said, well, I like a Supreme Court with 14 justices. So I think a lot of listeners may think, oh, well, this is a lot of talk. It's not going to happen. They'll never break that rule. But what do you think? If they get 51 Senate votes in the White House and the House, will they break the filibuster?
So I'm going to predict she's going to say yes. And here's the reason why, is they already tried to do it. They already tried to do it, and if it was so it was when the Senate was 50-50, and Kamala Harris was the as the president of the Senate, she gets to cast 2022. She gets to cast a tie-breaking vote, and so they were ready. They were going to do it. They were on their way to getting rid of the filibuster, and luckily, Joe Manchin from West Virginia and it was Sinema from Arizona said, "Hey, look, we can't support this. This needs to stay." And Chuck Schumer just lamented that they went down to 48 votes at that point for that matter. And so it is not. Would they do it if they had 51? They tried to do it when they had 50. +1. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, in the +1 being the vice president as president of the Senate being able to cast that tie-breaking vote. But let's keep going.
In a nanosecond, Paul. and they won't stop at abortion rights, and they won't stop at Supreme Court ethics, and they won't stop at election laws. I mean, this would be an open gate for Democrats to pass a law saying that they can confiscate your firearms, get rid of private insurance, and create Medicare for all. Any wish list that they want, there would be no bar against it. And one other thing, Paul, too, that I think people should be aware of, that Ron Wyden bill, not only would it create 14 justices on the court, it would create new hurdles, make it harder for the Supreme Court to overturn Congress. So not only would they put the folks that they want on the court, but then say, this huge new sweeping agenda we're going to put through, we're going to make sure even the court can't push back on it either. And so, this is about power filibuster and agenda, and it's not going to stop with one bill.
So much for judicial review and protecting the Bill of Rights.
Threats to democracy.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so this was a older clip that happened prior to the election, but that's when Chuck Schumer thought that they had a chance and that Harris was going to take the presidency and that the Democrats were going to take the Senate. And he played his cards too quickly. He didn't wait for the river card before he showed his hand, I think.
And now his tune is extremely different. Now he's saying, well, Republicans need to play nice. We need to be bipartisan. Remember, we need to be bipartisan.
Yeah, that political correspondent, Byron York, said the short version is this: please don't do to us what we were going to do to you. And again, this is just a couple short weeks ago, and really, they were planning on ending the filibuster. And this is just heartbreaking because, every time it's also called the nuclear option in the Senate as well. And there's always been these threats to do this nuclear option. But so what is the filibuster exactly, Kimberly?
Well, it requires 60 votes to pass bills, and it gives the minority party, which coming in January will be the Democratic Party,
right,
give them the ability to demand a higher standard of approval before, the majority party can just pass any old controversial legislation.
Yeah, right. So, interestingly, this is a rule. This is a Senate rule. This is nowhere in the Constitution. This is in the Senate bylaws, and it can be changed. But these are rules that have been agreed to, and the change that has slowly occurred, and there's been these adaptations or mutations, if you want to call it. But when the Democrats controlled the Senate during Obama's confirmation process, the Senate said, "Hey, look, we want to control judges and how judges would be assigned. And so we're going to change the rule, but only for federal judges." And that way they were able to bypass the Republican minority and get a bunch of judges confirmed. So then flip the script when Trump won, and it's time for him to appoint Supreme Court justices. The Republicans didn't have the 60 that they needed just to go over the Democrats, and so the Democrats were not going to. They were going to filibuster the Supreme Court nominees that Trump wanted to put in place. And so Mitch McConnell said, what's good for the goose is good for the gander.
Yeah, so are you saying the Republican Party did not want to get rid of the filibuster?
Yeah, they didn't want to get rid of the filibuster, but because Chuck Schumer did, in just the very precise way of judge confirmation, Mitch McConnell then said, well, we're going to change the rule again and modify it so that Supreme Court nominees can't be filibustered. But we're going to leave in the regular legislation and keep the filibuster for regular legislation. So just, the precedent was set by Schumer on the lower court federal judges. The precedent got set by the Republicans, basically saying, you did it for these judges, we're going to do it for these judges, and reduced it for Supreme Court. So the only thing that's really left is just regular legislation. And, there's also been some things on the filibuster. If you remember, gosh, it was a black and white movie, and it was like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington or something like that. It's an old movie, and it talks about the filibuster, and he's filibustering. And I'll do some research and put the actual title of the movie that I'm talking about. But he goes and he just is talking and it shows close-ups of him just sweating because really what it is you take the floor and you don't give up the floor as long as you are talking. right? Mm-hmm. And so that's why famously or infamously, Senator Ted Cruz did that massive marathon of a filibuster and red, green eggs and ham on the Senate floor and lasted, hours and hours.
23 hours.
Yeah.
I think he was trying to break a record of 25 hours.
Right, and he almost did it. He got really darn close, But now and actually Senator Joe Manchin was said that he was in favor was going to be a filibuster, that it was going to need to be that you would have to continuously talk. The rules have slightly changed now. If you just threaten a filibuster, it goes away. So there's no one actually has to stand up and talk indefinitely until the Congress or the Senate recesses. Just the threat of the filibuster, saying, hey, we're filibustering this, that's good enough now. But Manchin said it should go back to actually having to stand at the podium and
if you really believe in it.
Put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah. I mean, they just go, oh, Trump's a threat to democracy. We love democracy so much, but, we're going to get filibuster, get rid of it for this and that. I mean, come on. And then they want to pack the Supreme Court, and they want to put term limits on the Supreme Court justices. And the reason why we don't have term limits on the Supreme Court justices is so that they're not constantly looking for what they're going to do next.
Right.
And I guess that's why we don't have it for Congress either. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the term limits, that would be really hard to do because I'm not a legal scholar. I happen to pay attention more than the average bear, I'd say. I'm very interested. But I would say that would actually require an amendment to the Constitution to put term limits, because the Constitution specifically says that the judicial appointments are for life. And so to change that verbiage would actually have to be a constitutional amendment. Now, the amount of justices on the Supreme Court has changed over time.
Right, with FDR.
Yeah, back and forth. Well, I think he was going to try and pack the court, and it didn't work when he was trying to do that. But the justices have gone up and down throughout our long history of the United States, and so I think it was bad to try and play your hands, because the Democrats really leaned forward in the foxhole and they said, look, this is what we're going to do when we win. And so now, when it is a Republican president, a Republican House, a Republican Senate, and a conservative Supreme Court, now Schumer is saying, "Hey, just kidding. We need a lot of bipartisanship." And remember, that we're we were just kidding. And remember, you're for bipartisanship as well. Interestingly enough, Mitch McConnell, shortly after the election, but prior to the Republicans choosing who's going to be the next majority leader, which is Senator Thune, but Mitch McConnell came out and had a press conference and said that the filibuster remains healthy. And so the Republicans are going to be playing by the rules, because honestly, they're the good guys. I know everybody thinks their party are the good guys, but you have one party that's upholding the filibuster to make sure that there's bipartisanship, and there's one party that was going to tear down the filibuster, and they were just going to run right over it. And if one is truly bipartisan, even when they have the power to change it, which one are the good guys there?
Yeah, I mean, the left is known for abusing its power. I mean, come on, Joe Biden just redid Title IX, where men can be in women's locker spaces and whatnot.
Right. Well, I mean, there's obviously this flux that goes back and forth. I mean, when they're talking about judicial review in the Supreme Court, there's nowhere in the Constitution that gives the Supreme Court the authority to do judicial review. But that happened, in the Mulberry versus Madison case, when it came down to judicial appointments that Adams was going to make. But there were some judicial appointments that had not gotten delivered. And so they were going to be invalidated. And the Supreme got brought up to the Supreme Court and said that, hey, look, we're not going to deliver these appointments for the federal judges because we feel as though the law violated the Constitution that allowed these judicial appointments to happen. And so they kind of stole it. They stole judicial review. They said, look, we can't do this because the law violates the Constitution. And everyone kind of looked around and said, okay. And then that was the precedent that was set that the Supreme Court got to review the legislation as it pertains to whether it's constitutional or not. But still, this is just one of those things. The Democrats showed who they were when they thought they were going to be able to slide that cookie out of the cookie jar. And then when Trump won, that lid went down, their hand got caught in it. But now they're trying to scream and say, just kidding. We really want you to be it. But I can promise you this, they've already played their hand. If we, the voters, let the Democrats do this again, they've already let us know what it is they're going to do. So don't be surprised if whenever they're in power again, they're going to be power hungry and go ahead and change it.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you so much for watching Azimuth Podcast, and please stay tuned after these messages.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for listening. If you enjoy our show with all the stories we share, we would love your support.
And it's as easy as clicking that subscribe or follow button. This will ensure you never miss an episode and keeps us bringing you these important stories. Your support makes a huge difference. Thank you so much for being part of our podcast family.
Thanks, and keep tuning in.